Part 38. The legitimate daughter returns, the real daughter is reborn. Author, Past and Present. Chapter 371. Chapter 371 Cold Sweat. Longjio Temple. When Mr. Zhang rushed into the yard, he was not stopped at all. Seeing Wang Chen lying leisurely on the recliner, Mr. Zhang's tense expression suddenly relaxed. "Sit down." Wang Chen pointed to the chair next to him. Mr. Zhang was not polite to her. He sat on the chair and lectured her, "You are hiding here, you are quite relaxed." "I didn't hide." Wang Chen returned faintly. She rarely left Ajio Temple, but she never covered her tracks. Mr. Zhang was stunned for a moment, and then he said, "We have not seen each other for 20 years since we said goodbye to Jingzhou, right?" "It's been 20 years. Wang Chen sighed. Unexpectedly, she also stayed in Haoyu Temple for so long. Lao Zhang glanced at her. 20 years later, she still looked the same. She was just a little older, but she didn't look much changed. He didn't know what he thought of, and subconsciously touched his face. "You are 10 years older than me, so it's normal for you to be older than me." Wang Chen could see Zhang Yaoliang's thoughts at a glance. When she was still young, Zhang Yaoliang often asked her to call her brother. Now that she is old, she still cares about age, but the direction of her care has changed. Lao Zhang put down his hand and said, "You are still more slippery than me." He thought of something and asked, "That girl Leun, why did you like her? If you, the master, were more qualified, this girl would have a lot of potential. Why was she chosen by you?" This question actually really bothered Wang Chen. Even she herself doesn't quite understand. But seeing the annoyance in Zhang Yaoliang's eyes, Wang Chen didn't mind poking him in the sore spot again. "This child is destined to me." "Yes, yes, yes." After Mr. Zhang said this, the two of them fell silent for a while. "I don't know what else to say." The sky was getting dark, and although the two of them had nothing to say, they seemed to have a different feeling just sitting there. "Did you leave back then because of the 11 clans affairs?" Lao Zhang suddenly said something. But after waiting for a long time, he didn't hear Wang Chen's answer. He looked sideways, and Wang Chen looked up at the sky. As if she was aware of his gaze, the corners of her mouth curved slightly. Under the setting sun, Mr. Zhang saw the wrinkles at the corners of Wang Chen's eyes, which were signs of age. "It's all over." Wang Chen looked away, but did not choose to look at Mr. Zhang. Mr. Zhang didn't know what he thought of, so he stood up and said, "It's getting late, I'll come see you next time." "Don't make it sound like you're visiting me," Wang Chen laughed. "By the way, don't worry about your grandson, nothing will happen to him." Although Mr. Zhang was surprised that Wang Chen was talking about Zhang Yang, he still nodded and didn't dwell on it. The night is getting darker. Li Mansion. A rickety figure quietly appeared and walked towards Su Weiner's yard. She was wearing a black cloak, which made her even more inconspicuous in the dark night. Su Weiner's yard still maintains its original appearance, as if someone is still living there. Grandma Lan lowered her eyes and entered her room. At a glance, she knew that the house had been searched. She pulled the corner of her mouth, walked to a corner, squatted down, knocked on the third brick below, and took the brick away. She took out a black jar from it, not too big, and could be held with one hand. Grandma Lan did not stay, took the black jar and left the Li mansion in a hurry. Tightening the cloak she was wearing, Granny Lan walked towards the Sun mansion. In Kahuaziazu, Suleun had already rested. While sleeping, her face suddenly turned pale. Suleun opened her eyes. There was already a lot of cold sweat on her face and body. Something seemed to be moving inside her body. Suleun rolled up his sleeves almost immediately, and saw a small bulge squirming on his right arm. The poison in her body started to move. Subsequently, the memory of that day began to revive. Sulayun realized that this was a signal. It indicates that the goo worms in her body have completely hatched. But apart from the cold sweat all over his body and the small bulge on his arm, Sulayun had no other discomfort. Lotus heart! She shouted outside. Lian Xian walked into the room and said, "Miss, what's wrong? Please come and see Mr. Zhang." Lian Xian was stunned for a moment, but then she immediately reacted. She lit the candle and saw the bulge on Sulayun's arm at a glance. Still squirming a little bit, moving towards Sulayun's wrist. "Miss." Lian Xian was startled, but she did not forget Sulayun's instructions. She went to wake up Nanny Zhang and Kuliu first, and asked them to take care of Sulayun, while she ran to find Mr. Zhang. Soon, the originally quiet Sun mansion became noisy. Lao Zhang hurried over and noticed Sulayun sitting on the chair as soon as he entered the room. He walked forward. "What's going on?" As he asked, he looked down. Fell on Sulayun's arm. I saw that the small bulge was getting closer to the wrist, as if the gaze was on Sulayun's wrist. Lao Zhang's face became solemn. He stretched out his hand, tentatively placed it on the bulge, and then pressed it gently. The bulge shrank back. Lao Zhang looked at Sulayun, who shook his head and said he didn't feel anything. But she was still sweating coldly. She didn't feel very cold, the sweat was just coming out. Suya asked, "Mr. Zhang, what's going on with my sister?" Afraid that Sun Gro would be worried late at night, Suya did not let anyone notify Sun Gro, but only told his grandfather and uncle. At this time, Sun Xiao and Sun Changping were sitting not far away. Lao Zhang removed his hand and waited for a moment. The bulge gradually appeared again and continued to move forward. After checking Sulayun's pulse, Mr. Zhang already noticed something was wrong. If he continues to sweat, Sulayun is likely to fall into dehydration. No matter how much water you drink, it may still be too late. Lao Zhang told several people about the situation, and Sulayun himself knew that if she continued to sweat like this, there would definitely be problems. "Besides the cold sweat, what else do you feel?" Lao Zhang asked. Sulayun frowned, shook his head, and looked at his arm. "But I feel that when this goo worm reaches my wrist, another change will occur. But they can't gamble." Lao Zhang took everything with him when he came out. He took out the silver needle from the medicine box and let the lotus hearts and green willows in the house get busy. "Since the poisonous insect has appeared, take this opportunity to take it out." Sulayun took the anesthetic and her eyes gradually became hazy, and then she fell on the bed. The people in the room have been dispersed, leaving only Mr. Zhang, Lian Xian, and Kui Lu. Lian Xian is a doctor and can assist Mr. Zhang, while Kui Lu is responsible for doing other chores. After ensuring that Sulayun was completely unconscious, Mr. Zhang took a deep breath and took the knife handed over by Lian Xian. Performing a knife on the wrist, if a slight mistake is made, may cause massive bleeding or injury to the tendons of the hand. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter returns, the real daughter is reborn. Author, past and present. Chapter 372. Chapter 372 failed. Lao Zhang's solemn gaze fell on the small bulge. Under the influence of Ma Fei powder, Sulayun had completely lost consciousness, but the bulge was not affected. In other words, Ma Fei powder is useless against goo insects. On the arm, the goo worms are already squirming forward. Lao Zhang raised his hand, lowered it smoothly, and placed it 3 inches wide above the bulge. Under the nervous gazes of Lian Xian and Kui Lu, the knife in Mr. Zhang's hand cut Sulayun's skin, and blood immediately poured out. The opening was still going down, and when he was about to touch the bulge, Mr. Zhang suddenly stopped. Under his fingers, the bulge had disappeared. "The worm is hiding." Mr. Zhang did not panic. He took the silver needle and inserted it into several acupuncture points of Sulayun to prevent excessive bleeding from the openings on his arm. The knife was put aside by him. Under the flesh and blood, the interlacing of muscles and bones can be vaguely seen. Lian Xian and Kuliu both turned pale. Seeing that their young lady was going to suffer such a crime, they both felt distressed and annoyed. If they had been more careful, maybe the young lady would not have been kidnapped and poisoned. "Bring me the brown bottle." Lao Zhang spoke in a deep voice and gave instructions. As soon as Lian Xian heard what Mr. Zhang said, she didn't dare to delay and quickly brought the brown bottle. She was about to remove the stopper from the bottle when she heard Mr. Zhang say, "No need to open it." Lian Xian let go of her hand and handed over the bottle. When the bleeding on Suleun's arm gradually subsided, Mr. Zhang opened the brown bottle and carefully poured it under the wound without letting the contents come into contact with the wound. Lian Xian was close and saw what Mr. Zhang poured out. It is somewhat sticky and reddish-brown, and looks somewhat similar to the poisonous blood vomited by a poisoned person. There seems to be a faint rancid smell. The thick reddish-brown object fell on the skin. It did not move around, but stayed in place. Lao Zhang lowered his eyelids, took a jade hairpin, and gently opened it. Later, Mr. Zhang took the candle and placed it next to Suleun's arm. The three of them took a few steps back. The heat from the candle spreads to the arm. The smell from thick objects is stronger. Just when the smell was getting stronger and stronger, Lian Xian and Kuliu suddenly saw something milky yellow coming out of their young lady's wound. Goosebumps immediately appeared on both of their bodies. That is the substance secreted by the voodoo insects, which means that the voodoo bugs were attracted. Lao Zhang signaled the two of them to take a few steps away, while he still stood there, observing the goo insects. The body of the poisonous insect began to emerge from the wound, and its tiny mouth moved, spitting out a milky yellow substance. The voodoo that should have been dark brown inside the host's body has undergone unknown changes. Now it has become transparent, and it seems that the structure inside the voodoo can be seen. The markings on the body are vaguely visible, and there is a faint trace of blood red on them. Just like the blood flowing in the human body. Lao Zhang stared at the goo worm closely. It only came out halfway. Perhaps it was not warm enough, or it may have left the host's body. The goo worm moved uneasily, and then slowly shrank back. Lao Zhang pursed his lips tightly, realizing that he had failed. When the goo worms returned to Suleun's body, Mr. Zhang stepped forward, scraped off the less sticky reddish-brown stuff from his arm, and put it back into the brown bottle. "Mr. Zhang, did you fail?" Lian Xian saw Mr. Zhang's actions. She saw the voodoo crawling back into Suleun's body, and she knew in her heart that it might have been a failure. "But I couldn't help but ask." Lao Zhang nodded, "It's not a complete failure. At least it proves that this method is effective." While talking, Mr. Zhang sutured the wound on Suleun's arm. "Then go out of the house." "Mr. Zhang, how are you doing?" As soon as Suye saw Mr. Zhang coming out, he immediately greeted him. Behind him, the sky began to glow with light. "The sun has begun to rise." Lao Zhang shook his head and said in a heavy tone, "The poisonous insect is still in her body and cannot be taken out for the time being. So what should I do now? I already have a method in my mind, but I still need to try it a few times." This time, the goo worms came out of her body a little bit, which also bought us time. Lao Zhang explained. Most of the goo insects in southern Xinjiang will die immediately after leaving the host's body, which means that the connection between the goo insects and the host is completely severed. When the goo insect crawled back, Mr. Zhang noticed that the color on its body had become darker. This means that the goo insect still needs to stay in Suleun's body for a period of time before it can re-establish contact with Suleun's body. This is the time gained by Mr. Zhang. Only when the voodoo is completely parasitic in the host body, the owner of the voodoo can fully control the voodoo. Before this, if the owner of the goo insect took action forcefully, it would also cause him to be injured. This kind of injury is dangerous to the owner of the goo insect. What Mr. Zhang is worried about now is, what should he do if the other party takes action forcefully? General Su, have you found out the whereabouts of Granny Lan? Lao Zhang asked. Su Ye said with a stern face, not yet, Mr. Zhang. Does this matter have anything to do with Granny Lan? Su Weiner should not be the master of the goo insect. I think Granny Lan is the key to solving the problem. Lao Zhang returned. I understand, I will send more people to check. There is some movement of goo insects this time, and I suspect that Granny Lan may be nearby. Lao Zhang reminded him. Su Ye nodded, turned around and went to arrange the manpower. Sun Xiao and Sun Changping stepped forward. I'm sorry to trouble you today. You're welcome, General. Sunday. This girl Li Yun will wake up in about an hour. I have to go back and study it again, so I won't stay any longer. Zhang Laotong bowed to each other and left the yard. Sun Xiao and Sun Changping looked at each other, and the former said, you should go back first. I'll talk to Jiro later. Yes, father. When Sun Changping left, Sun Xiao stood there for a while, and then went to the side room to wait for Suleun to wake up. The effect of Ma Fei powder fades away. An hour later, Suleun woke up. Lian Xian helped her stand up. Miss, are you feeling uncomfortable somewhere? Suleun turned his head and saw his bandaged wound, and asked, has the poison been taken out? Lian Xian was silent for a moment, then shook her head and said, Miss, not yet. Suleun seemed to have known the answer for a long time and was not disappointed. Did Mr. Zhang say anything? Lian Xian conveyed Mr. Zhang's words to Suleun word by word. At the end, she said, Miss, Mr. Zhang said that if you feel uncomfortable again, you must tell the slaves and don't hide it. I understand, don't worry, if I feel uncomfortable, I will definitely tell you. Suleun smiled, which actually comforted Lian Xian. End of this chapter. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter returns, the real daughter is reborn. Author, past and present. Chapter 373. Chapter 373. A Glimmer of Light. Lian Xian looked at the smile on her young lady's face and quickly covered up the worry and sadness in her eyes. My own lady is so calm and relaxed, how can she still be like a resentful woman? Miss, the old general is still in the side room. I will go and inform you first. Well, let's go. When Lian Xian left, Suleun sat up straight and his eyes fell on his arms. The wound on her arm was not large, and it was not bandaged to the wrist. Hence, you can clearly see the flat wrist and no bulge. But before she took Ma Fei-san, the bulge was already not far from her wrist. Suleun's eyes darkened a bit. She recalled the memories of that day in her mind. She watched helplessly as the goo insects crawled into her body, and Granny Ian's face also appeared in front of her eyes. Leun. Sun Xiao's voice came, interrupting Suleun's thoughts. Suleun raised his eyes and looked at Sun Xiao. Grandpa, I have made you worry. There is nothing to worry about. You are my granddaughter. If I don't worry about you, who else can I worry about? Sun Xiao was worried that Suleun couldn't think about it. He carefully considered his words and comforted him. You are also worried about this poison. We will definitely find a way. Grandpa, Yuner knows. Seeing what Sun Xiao meant, Suleun raised a smile to show his good attitude. Grandpa, please go back and rest. You also need to rest first. Sun Xiao did not stay long. After confirming that his granddaughter was fine, he left. Although Suleun had slept for a long time under the influence of Ma Fei-san, Suleun still felt weak all over. After lying down, he fell asleep soon. I don't know if it was due to the influence of the poisonous insects, but Suleun felt weak and listless for several days. Occasionally sitting down, if no one talks to her, she will fall asleep. This state lasted for about 4 days before finally fading away. Miss, something happened again at Chaeyun Pavilion. Lian Xian walked in. In the past few days, the old lady over at Chaeyun Pavilion had not been quiet. Either he is clamoring to go back to Yunchinj, or he is saying that Xiang Lingling is not filial to him. But once it was time to take action, the old lady kept silent and made it clear that she either really wanted to return to Yunchinj or wanted to find fault with the Sun family and Xiang Lingling. The cousin girl was able to handle it well. When the old lady made trouble, she would follow her instructions, but when she really wanted to do something, she was as silent as the old lady. Mrs. Yang also saw Xiang Lingling's perfunctory behavior and was so angry that she became even more arrogant and looked for faults in Xiang Lingling. She wanted to say that Xiang Lingling was worthless. If nothing big happens, just let her go. The first time Sulayun and the rest of the Sun family went to take a look, but when they noticed something was wrong, they didn't bother to pay attention to it. They just asked the servants to pay attention and don't let the old lady hurt themselves. But today, Sulayun still has to go to Chaeyun Pavilion. This was the first time Mr. Zhang gave Xiang Lingling acupuncture treatment. Sulayun went there, firstly to learn, and secondly to reassure Xiang Lingling. In the Chaeyun Pavilion, he got angry at the old lady. Knowing that no one paid attention to her, he cursed a few more times and then stopped. When Sulayun entered the yard, he finished his last words to the old lady and turned back to the house. He noticed the noise and turned around to look at the old lady. When she saw Sulayun, her face became even more ugly. "Grandma." Sulayun bowed obediently. Obviously there was no problem to be found, but Mrs. Yang just felt uncomfortable. But she had scolded enough just now, so she could only say lukewarmly, "I can't bear the courtesy of the village master Pingle." After saying that, Xiang Madam stopped looking at Sulayun and walked inside without stopping. Sulayun would not care about such an elder who could not understand the situation, so he also followed Xiang Lingling's house. "Cousin, are you here?" Xiang Lingling hesitated a little with black cloth on her eyes. This black cloth was asked by Mr. Zhang to bring her. Although she could not see it, her eyes could still be exposed to light. This would make her more comfortable during the subsequent treatment. "Cousin, do you think Mr. Zhang's method will be effective?" Without expectations, the feeling of disappointment will not be too strong. Xiang Lingling knew it very well and didn't dare to think too much about it. You have to try every method one by one. If you fail the first time, it doesn't mean you will continue to fail in the future. Sulayun comforted. But actually, it's hard for her to say. Lao Zhang's method was mentioned to her, and she also provided some ideas, but Sulayun didn't know the details. Soon, Mr. Zhang arrived. Sitting there, listening to what was in his ears, Xiang Lingling became more and more nervous. She subconsciously raised her head, but halfway up, she suddenly realized that she couldn't see at all. Mr. Zhang laid out the things he needed on the table one by one, and then said to Xiang Lingling, "Miss Xiang, I will perform acupuncture on you next. I will ask you about your situation at any time. If you feel uncomfortable, please remember to tell me." Xiang Lingling hesitated for a moment and nodded. "Cousin, are you still there?" She nodded and asked. Sulayun said, "I'm here." After saying that, she sat next to Xiang Lingling, reached out and took Xiang Lingling's hand to show her presence. Hand held by Sulayun, Xiang Lingling seemed to calm down a bit. "Then I'll start." Seeing this, Mr. Zhang nodded to Sulayun and said. Replied to Lingling, "Sorry to trouble you." But Sulayun could feel that for a moment, Xiang Lingling's whole body stiffened. Silver needles were inserted into Xiang Lingling's face one after another. After a while, there were several more needles. While Sulayun memorized the location of the silver needle, he patted the back of Xiang Lingling's hand to soothe her uneasy mood. "So hot." Suddenly, Xiang Lingling opened her mouth. She seemed to want to reach out and move her face, but Sulayun held her back. Lao Zhang gently touched her eyelids covered by black cloth and felt a heat different from that on her cheeks. Will it feel uncomfortable? Sulayun asked softly. Xiang Lingling felt it and shook her head. No, my eyes just feel hot, but it's different from applying a hot towel. This different feeling made Xiang Lingling's heart beat a little faster. Lao Zhang said, this is a normal situation, no need to panic. Then, Mr. Zhang raised Lingling's arm and placed a few needles on her forearm, as well as the other arm. Xiang Lingling's hands were placed on the table. Sulayun saw Xiang Lingling's uneasiness and put his hands on the back of her hands again and patted her gently. Xiang Lingling frowned. At this time, Mr. Zhang had no more acupuncture. How do you feel, Miss Xiang? Lao Zhang observed Xiang Lingling's face and asked. Xiang Lingling shook her head, except for my eyes being a little warm, I don't feel anything else. Her voice paused, and then, with disbelief in her voice, she said, I seem to have seen a glimmer of light. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter returns, the real daughter is reborn. Author, past and present. Chapter 374. Chapter 374 Reflection. When Mr. Zhang heard this, he remained calm as usual. He glanced aside and asked someone to fetch a candle and light it. Subsequently, Mr. Zhang placed the lit candle in front of Xiang Lingling. Xiang Lingling moved uneasily. What is it? She felt the warmth from the candle. At the same time, she also found that her eyes were a little brighter. Light. Xiang Lingling felt it and said, candle. She smelled the smell, and her eyelids under the black cloth blinked wildly. No need for Mr. Zhang to explain, Xiang Lingling knew what he was doing. Mr. Zhang, I can see it, this method works. Even though she was covered with a black cloth, she couldn't hide Xiang Lingling's joy. Sulayun glanced at Mr. Zhang, his expression was not as happy as Xiang Lingling. Lao Zhang put down the candle, and then pulled out the silver needle from Xiang Lingling's body. The light that appeared in front of my eyes gradually faded away. Xiang Lingling froze, no. No more. Her voice was a bit muffled. Sulayun did not speak, but held her hand tightly, silently expressing his comfort. When the silver needle was completely removed, the light in front of Xiang Lingling completely disappeared, and she fell into darkness again. The darkness after seeing the light was a bit difficult for Xiang Lingling to accept. Mr. Zhang, has it been successful, will I be able to see it after a while? Hurriedly asked Lingling. Don't be anxious, Miss Xiang. Lao Zhang spoke, the acupuncture method I used on you is indeed effective, but, it still needs some time for me to improve the acupuncture method. Okay, I'm not in a hurry, I'm not in a hurry. Speaking to Lingling, she couldn't help but hugged herself, trembling all over. Sulayun stroked her back gently, Lingling, this matter cannot be rushed. Have you forgotten what I told you? After being silent for a long time, Xiang Lingling slowly said, cousin, I remember. She remembered what Sulayun said before, but at that moment, she really felt that she was about to see it. Thinking of this, Xiang Lingling couldn't help but said, Mr. Zhang, does it take longer to apply the acupuncture? For example, do you wait for an hour before taking off the silver needles? Lao Zhang sighed, it's not that simple. He nodded to Sulayun, I have to go back to check, so I'll leave first. Watching Mr. Zhang leave, Sulayun turned back to Lingling. Cousin. This set of acupuncture is indeed effective, but treating your blindness symptoms is not that simple. Having seen Mr. Zhang's techniques, Sulayun naturally knew what he was doing. Since there is a way to go, what are you worried about? Sulayun's question made Xiang Lingling fall silent. After a while, Xiang Lingling raised her eyes and looked in the direction of Sulayun, cousin, won't you drive me away? Why do you think so? Sulayun was stunned for a moment, but quickly responded, "Are you worried about your grandmother?" Xiang Lingling bit her lower lip uneasily. In the past few days, her grandmother had gone too far. Grandma is like this, but I can't persuade her. You don't have to worry about this. I told you before that we will definitely take care of your blindness. Suleun soothed Xiang Lingling's uneasy heart, stood up and left. In the palace. Yufu Hall. Concubine Qin, dressed in plain clothes, knelt in front of the Buddha statue. "Mother, Imperial Dr. Wu is here." Yudi quickly walked into the hall, her tone filled with joy. Concubine Qin paused as she moved the wooden beads, then opened her eyes and looked at Yudi. "Invite him in." Hearing Concubine Qin's calm voice, the joy on Yudi's face faded. She nodded and said, "Yes." Physician Wu was led into the palace by Yudi. When he saw Concubine Qin kneeling on the futon, he showed an indescribable expression. "Mother, I have lived up to your instructions and made the medicine." Physician Wu did not pretend to be someone else's, and took out the medicine he made to treat asthma. Ms. later asked someone to send a prescription and a note. After many attempts, Dr. Wu finally made the medicine. Concubine Qin had a smile on her face and said, "I'd like to trouble Dr. Wu." "Your Majesty, you're welcome." Looking at Concubine Qin, who was getting thinner and thinner, Dr. Wu couldn't help but sigh. The matter of Concubine Shu's miscarriage has already been found out, but for some unknown reason, His Majesty took back Concubine Qin's phoenix seal and ordered her to reflect on her mistakes in the Yufa Palace. This reflection has taken more than 2 months. Concubine Shu and the child in her belly have been through the danger, and it is now almost 6 months. Dr. Wu examined Empress Shu and found out that there were 2 children in her belly, a boy and a girl. As long as she gives birth safely, Concubine Shu will be more expensive than her son. Linner's illness has caused trouble to Dr. Wu. Concubine Qin spoke calmly. After saying this, she closed her eyes and continued to play with the wooden beads in her hand. Seeing this, Dr. Wu also knew that Concubine Qin had issued an order to expel guests. He cupped his hands and said, "I'm sorry to leave." After leaving the Yufa Palace, Dr. Wu walked towards the palace where the 13th prince now lives. Concubine Qin was placed in solitary confinement, and the 13th prince also moved out of the Yufa Palace to another palace. According to His Majesty's wishes, the 13th prince is not young anymore and does not need to live with his mother and concubine all the time. Although Imperial Physician Wu was not involved in the affairs of the court, he also heard that Emperor Jianwen had already selected the prince's palace for the 13th prince, and was only waiting for the construction to be completed before sending the 13th prince out of the palace. He lowered his eyes, a little frightened. "I don't know what your Majesty means by this." In the palace, Xiaolin was holding a book and reading aloud. When he heard the palace servant's report, he raised his head and said, "Please come in, Dr. Wu." More than 2 months after leaving Qin Gaifei, Xiaolin also changed. When Imperial Physician Wu saw Xiaolin, he was no less surprised than when he saw Concubine Qin. "The lower official has met the 13th prince. Mr. Wu, are you here because of my illness?" After being treated by Dr. Wu before, Xiaolin's health was much better than before. He also knew that his mother-in-law and Dr. Wu were trying to find a way to cure his asthma. Physician Wu nodded and said, "Exactly." He took out the medicine bottle with pills from his arms and handed it to him. "13th prince, you should take 3 pills of this medicine every day. It is best after lunch. After taking the medicine, you can have a good rest and sleep. Wait for a while to allow the medicine to take effect." "How long should I eat?" Xiaolin asked. Over the years, he has probably taken more medicine than many people. Physician Wu made a rough calculation and said, "13th prince, you will probably need to take this medicine for the first half of the year. By the time you finally add acupuncture, your asthma will be completely eradicated." Okay. Xiaolin was silent for a moment and then said, "Mr. Wu, Are you coming from my mother's side?
Yes, Your Highness.
Physician Wu understood what Xiao Lin wanted to ask and was about to open his mouth to answer when he heard Xiao Lin say, "Forget it, I'm troubling you today. You can go back." End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter returns, the real daughter is reborn. Author, past and present. Chapter 375. Chapter 375 I don't understand. Physician Wu lowered his eyes, turned and left without saying anything. As soon as the 13th prince was born, he was diagnosed with asthma, and it was the imperial physician Wu who took care of him. If you really count, Emperor Jianwen didn't even spend as much time with the 13th prince as Dr. Wu. In the past 2 months, imperial physician Wu has also noticed the changes in the 13th prince. It was not difficult for him to understand the emperor's intention. Qin Gaifei has been her favorite for many years, and the Qin family has also enjoyed many blessings. Emperor Jianwen was trying to attack the Qin family and Qin's noble concubine. It seems that the matter of establishing a crown prince is not groundless. Lu Mansion. Prince Xiaojin came in person, and everyone in the Lu family looked solemn. Lu Suiya was combing her hair, and Xiao walked in quickly. "Miss, His Royal Highness Prince Yu is already in the front hall, madam, let you pass." Since the young lady came back from Yangzhou, Xiao can clearly feel the changes in the young lady. Previously, the madam had been urging the young lady to get married. No matter what kind of person, as long as he was useful to the Lu family, she would push him towards the young lady. The young lady resisted at first, but then gradually became depressed and allowed the madam to arrange it. I don't know why, but those people who liked her said things nicely at first, but after meeting the young lady, they stopped her. Even if the young lady was not willing to marry those people, how could she not be sad because of their attitudes? But it's different now. The lady had a smile on her face and her temper became much more cheerful. Xiao was a little lucky, but fortunately Miss Leun came to help her. "Let's go there." Lu Suiya put down her comb, stood up and went to the front hall with Xiao. Halfway, I met Lu Shuiying who was also rushing to the front hall. Seeing Lu Shuiying snorted softly, as if she was dissatisfied, with a somewhat unclear meaning. "Younger sister." Lu Suiya met Lu Shuiying and greeted her patiently. Lu Shuiying walked past her and whispered, "Don't you change your mind after seeing His Highness Prince Yu. Do not worry." Before Lu Suiya finished speaking, Lu Shuiying had already walked out some distance. She stopped talking. When the two sisters arrived at the front hall, Lu Hongzheng said to Wang Yu, "Your Highness is laughing, my eldest daughter's marriage was decided early in the morning, but I didn't expect that the servant didn't make it clear, and instead made a joke. Lu is here to give your Highness, please apologize." Xiao Jin was sitting on the main seat with a smile on his lips. "Hide a bit of coldness. Master Lu, you are so polite. Master Lu, this can be regarded as a double blessing." Lu Hongbi smiled but said, "I would like to borrow your Highness's kind words." Seeing Lu Suiya and Lu Shuiying arriving, Lu Hong waved and said, "Shuiying, come forward and see His Highness Prince Yu." Upon hearing this, Lu Shuiying walked a little faster, walked up to Xiao Jin, and bowed. "Shuiying has met His Highness." After saying that, Lu Shuiying glanced at Xiao Jin without wanting to speak, her cheeks turned dazed. Xiao Jin smiled and said, "Miss Lu's relatives, you and I don't need to be so polite." Lu Shuiying understood the meaning of these words immediately. In some time, she will marry Xiao Jin, and then they will be husband and wife, and there is really no need to stick to etiquette. Lu Shuiying forgot that if she were an ordinary person, she wouldn't need to be so polite. But Xiao Jin is a prince, a prince. The etiquette of the royal family is naturally different. Lu Suiya hid her sarcasm and saluted respectfully, "I have met your Highness." "Miss Lu, please get up." Xiao Jin glanced at Lu Suiya, his eyes a little deeper. "I have made Miss Lu frightened before, so I specially prepared an apology, which can be regarded as congratulating Miss Lu on her wedding in advance. Thank you, Your Highness. Lu Sui's expression remained unchanged. After thanking Xiaojin, she sat to one side. There was some excitement in the front hall, but Lu Sui didn't say another word. When Xiaojin was about to leave, Lu Hong planned to see him off in person, but Xiaojin said, "Master Lu is staying here, why don't you let Miss Lu see me off?" Xiaojin didn't even hide it at all, and spoke his thoughts clearly. Lu Hong's eyes swept over Xiaojin and Lu Sui, then let Sui see His Highness off. Dad. Lu Shuiying was a little dissatisfied. As soon as she opened her mouth, she was stopped by Lu Huayuan. Watching Lu Sui and Xiaojin leave, Lu Shuiying said displeasedly, "Dad, aren't you afraid that eldest sister will get into trouble with His Highness Prince Yu again?" "You shut up." Lu Hong's cold eyes swept over Lu Shuiying. In the past, his little daughter's coquettishness was now a move that would put the Lu family in danger. Before getting married, it's time to discipline Shuiying. Lu Hong looked at his wife calmly. Su Changjing's back stiffened. "Yes, sir." Lu Sui was 3 steps away from Xiaojin and followed him slowly. "Miss Lu and Miss Su have a good relationship." Xiaojin spoke. Lu Sui followed him, not knowing what Xiaojin's expression was at this time. You can only hear a bit of coldness in his tone. Lu Sui lowered her head and replied, "Leun is my cousin." Didn't directly answer Xiaojin's question, but it's not like he didn't answer it. Xiaojin raised a sneer at the corner of his mouth, but did not ask Lu Sui any more questions. At the door of Lu Mansion, Xiaojin turned around and looked at Lu Sui. Why did Miss Lu suddenly change her mind? I'm sorry that I don't understand what Your Highness said. Lu Sui lowered her head. Looking at Lu Sui like this, Xiaojin looked at it for a moment, then turned around and got on the carriage. When the carriage drove away, Lu Sui slowly raised her head. There was already some cold sweat on her back. The crime of deceiving the prince is no less than deceiving the emperor. Without Suleun's help, Lu Sui wouldn't have dared to do this. Now, she already has a baby girl, and the marriage between the Lu family and Prince Yu's mansion has also changed. I just said that the servants spread the wrong message, but in fact, Lu Shuiying was the only one who was going to marry to Prince Yu's mansion. Lu Sui didn't think about how Suleun did it. She was very grateful to Suleun in her heart. After standing at the door of Lu mansion for a long time, Lu Sui walked towards the house with somewhat stiff steps. Xiao saw her move and hurriedly stepped forward. "Miss, be careful." Noticing that the lady's movements were a little stiff, Xiao stretched out his hand to support Lu Sui. The master and servant walked to the small courtyard. When Xiaojin returned to the palace, concubine Shen greeted him. "Your Majesty, the process of the wedding. It's up to you to decide this matter." Xiaojin shook off Shen Dan and walked to the study. Shen Dan did not follow, and threw the gift list back to the maid. She had just cleaned up the mess in the Shen family, and when she came back, she learned that Xiaojin wanted to take in 2 concubines. At that time, she could no longer be angry. People were coming to the palace anyway, and she would settle the accounts carefully then. But unexpectedly, in just a few days, things changed again. The number of concubines that Xiaojin wanted to take increased from 2 to 1. Shen Dan didn't know what happened, but she found out that Lu Sui had a good relationship with Suleun. Thinking about it like this, Shen Dan couldn't help but suspect Suleun and felt that she had tampered with it. End of this chapter. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter returns, the real daughter is reborn. Author, past and present. Chapter 376. Chapter 376. Something happened to King An. Yawangfu, study. Xiaojin entered the room, and there were already several people standing in the room. When they saw Xiao Jin, they all bowed respectfully. "I see His Royal Highness King Yu." Xiao Jin sat down, her expression no longer showing the gentleness she usually displayed, but became sinister. "What do you think about the Yangzhou matter? The people standing downstairs are all officials from the court." They were not wearing court uniforms, but it was easy to tell from the respectful gestures of several people that they were all Xiao Jin's people. Several people looked at me and I looked at you, but no one could stand up and say a word. It wasn't until Xiao Jin's expression became more and more impatient that someone slowly walked out. "This person is Chen Cheng, the Minister of the Ministry of Industry. Your Highness, I believe that the Yangzhou magistrate's actions will lead to an investigation. If he goes too far, I will definitely warn my subordinates not to do this." "Ah!" Xiao Jin snorted lightly, and several people in the hall couldn't help but shrink back, with a bit of fear. "I think there is something hidden in this." Chen Cheng was stunned for a moment, but he quickly realized what he was doing and subconsciously tensed up his nerves. "Your Majesty, what you mean is, someone leaked the secret." As soon as he finished speaking, the other people fell to their knees. "Your Majesty is aware of this, but I will definitely not dare." "My lords, please get up quickly. I know what kind of people you are, but Yangzhou is far away from the capital. It is difficult for me to control what will happen." As Xiao Jin spoke, his eyes lowered and fell on a few people. Those people didn't dare to get up. They just lowered their heads and listened to Xiao Jin's instructions. "There is no intention to pursue the Yangzhou matter any further, but the tale that needs to be cleaned up should be cleaned up, your lords." "I understand." There is no need to think carefully about Xiao Jin's words. The Yangzhou prefect will be forced back to the capital soon, and he may not live long. The adults looked at each other and fell silent. "Master Chen, please stay for a moment." "Yes." Chen Cheng stopped, turned around to look at Xiao Jin, and quickly lowered his head. After the others left, Xiao Jin got down from his position and walked to Chen Cheng. "Master Chen, there is something that I, after thinking about it for a long time, would like to leave it to you to handle." "Please give me your instructions, your Majesty." Chen Cheng returned without any hesitation. Xiao Jin nodded with satisfaction, "Then I'll trouble Mr. Chen." Wang An's mansion. Wang An is lying in the gentle countryside, lingering. Suddenly, the door was broken open and the imperial guards rushed in. "What do you do?" King An's concubines fled in all directions, while King An looked at the imperial guards who rushed in with cruel eyes. Feng Hu, the leader of the imperial army, stepped forward and said in a cold voice, "Your Majesty, King An, your Majesty has a decree, and he ordered us to take you into the palace." "Father." Wang An's expression changed, and he saw that the faces of all the people in the imperial army were indifferent, and his heart became even tighter. "What happened?" Feng Hu stared at King An and said, "Your Highness, let's go. I, the king, will change my clothes first." King An knew that he could not run away, so he turned around and put on his clothes before leaving with the imperial army. With such a big battle, many people in the capital have heard about it. In the palace, Wang An was taken to the Jinluan Palace. As soon as he entered, King An saw several ministers kneeling on the ground. His legs went weak and he collapsed to the ground before anyone could step forward. Emperor Jianwen raised his head coldly and looked at King An. "Lao Lu, why don't you come forward?" Wang An felt that his legs were so weak that he couldn't move. Although he didn't know what happened, King An understood that Emperor Jianwen's reaction was definitely not a good thing. Not to mention, King An's eyes passed over several ministers. These people were all working for him secretly. "Master Feng." Emperor Jianwen spoke calmly. Emperor Jianwen didn't need to say anything. Feng Hu understood. He lifted Prince An with one hand as easily as he was carrying a piece of clothing, and brought Prince An to the front. Wang An tried his best to control himself and sat up on his knees. My son, my minister, see, I have met my father. Do you know why I came to you? Emperor Jianwen didn't care about King An's inappropriate etiquette. He just lowered his body slightly and asked every word. Sweat broke out on King An's forehead, and several adults nearby had already prostrate themselves on the ground, unable to utter a single word. My son, I don't know. Eunuch Wan, go and give my sixth son a good talk. Emperor Jianwen withdrew his gaze and gave the order. After receiving the order, Wang Gong bowed his head and walked down to King An. A few dull sounds sounded, and several account books and a piece of iron ore appeared in front of King An. Wang An felt a chill all over his body, and he kowtowed violently. While kowtowing, he said, Father, please calm down. Father, please calm down. My son, I also want to give my father a surprise. At this time, King An's voice became sharper and he did not stutter. Emperor Jianwen looked at it with interest, but did not speak. Eunuch Wan lowered his head slightly. From the corner of his eye, he noticed that Emperor Jianwen did not make any move, and then he said, Your Highness, Prince An, please take a good look at this account book. Where did King An dare to move? His hands kept shaking, and he finally managed to hold an account book. Old Lu, what was the surprise you said you wanted to give me? Suddenly, Emperor Jianwen spoke. This sound startled King An, and the account book fell to the ground again. Without bothering to look through the pages, King An lowered his head to the ground and said, Father, my son also discovered a mine not long ago. He originally planned to mine it, but let me tell you, Father, that my son has absolutely no intention of taking it for himself. What about the mine? Emperor Jianwen's voice became colder and colder. Even the father-in-law's heart tightened. It had been many years since he had seen the emperor so angry. Mines, King An was stunned, those mines are all in the mines. He thought that Emperor Jianwen was angry that he did not report the mines and formed a party for personal gain, but it does not seem to be the case. Although those ministers were working for him, King An knew that his mother-in-law died young and her natal family could not give him much help, so he knew very well how far he could go. Therefore, establish good relationships with several royal brothers early on, so that no matter who ascends the throne, he will be safer. Emperor Jianwen sneered when he heard what King An said. He slammed the table and said, In the mine. Old Six, you are really good at telling lies. I haven't seen a single mine in this mine. Impossible. Wang An exclaimed in surprise. But soon, he realized that what he said now was clearly a slap in the face to his father. His father must have asked someone to check whether there is any ore in the mine. King An's back was sweating even more, and his clothes seemed to be getting soaked. My father is aware that my son really did not embezzle those iron mines. King An was trembling, but he couldn't produce any evidence. Emperor Jianwen was a little bored and waved his hand, lock up Prince An first. Yes. Feng Hu picked up King An again and took him down with several other officials. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter returns, the real daughter is reborn. Author, past and present. Chapter 377. Chapter 377, Sharing Your Majesty's Worries. Jinluan Palace fell into deathly silence. Eunuch Wan returned to Emperor Jianwen and stood with his head bowed without saying a word. What do you think about this matter? Emperor Jianwen suddenly spoke up. He did not mention anyone by name, but there was no one else besides Wang Gong. When Wang Gong was in a dilemma and didn't know how to answer, he heard a sound from outside. Soon, a little ran over and whispered something in the ear of Wang Gong. Your Majesty, Prince Jin is here. Why is he here? Emperor Jianwen was slightly startled. If the other princes were coming, he wouldn't be so surprised, but Xiao Shenjiao was different. Xiao Shenjiao didn't like coming to see him. Emperor Jianwen knew this very well. Let him in. Yes. Eunuch Wan waved his hand and did not let the young go. Instead, he personally invited Xiao Shenjiao to come in. Seeing the Jinluan palace, Xiao Shenjiao knew that he must have arrived a step too late. Are you here to plead for Lao Lu? Emperor Jianwen's tone was calm, but not as cold as before. Among the several children, Xiao Shenjiao is undoubtedly his favorite. When the queen was still alive, the relationship between Emperor Jianwen and Xiao Shenjiao was not as cold as it is now. In other words, the few people at that time looked like ordinary people. Parents are loving and sons are filial. Eunuch Wan couldn't help but think of the year when the queen died. Xiao Shenjiao made a big fuss in the imperial study room and almost burned down the palace where the queen lived. That matter was suppressed by Emperor Jianwen, and the palace was abandoned. I have no such intention. Xiao Shenjiao's tone was equally cold, and his posture was clearly respectful, but no one could feel the hint of respect. Emperor Jianwen was not angry. Then what are you doing? He was in a pretty good mood. I have something to show your majesty. Xiao Shenjiao took out a scroll from his sleeve, and Eunuch Wan took it and handed it to Emperor Jianwen. The first time he saw the scroll, Emperor Jianwen's expression changed. Eunuch Wan was a little confused and glanced at the scroll. Suddenly, his expression changed. But he was quickly suppressed by Wang Gonggong. Emperor Jianwen stretched out his hand. Eunuch Wan was so close that he could clearly see Emperor Jianwen's trembling fingertips. Eunuch Wan felt that the scroll in his hand was getting hotter and hotter. It wasn't until Emperor Jianwen took the scroll that Wang Gonggong breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. Where did you find it? Emperor Jianwen did not rush to open the scroll, but looked at Xiao Shenjiao and asked. Xiao Shenjiao stood on the spot wearing black clothes and said, Yang Zhou. Yang Zhou again? Eunuch Wan was murmuring in his heart. But Emperor Jianwen had no reaction. He seemed to have thought of something. Opening the scroll, there were several lines of words written on it. Emperor Jianwen read them word by word, and after a while, he put the scroll on the table. Co-authorship is not a request for mercy, but a gift to me with evidence. Emperor Jianwen's reaction was a little different from what Wang Gonggong thought. He lowered his head and glanced at Emperor Jianwen cautiously. His eyes fell on the scroll again. From Eunuch Wan's point of view, he couldn't clearly see what was written in the scroll, but at a glance, Eunuch Wan could still recognize that the writing on the scroll was not that of the person he was thinking of. After contacting Emperor Jianwen again, Wang Gonggong thought for a while and still felt that the scroll was related to King An's affairs. It is what I should do to share your majesty's worries. As soon as these words came out, both Emperor Jianwen and Eunuch Wan were stunned for a moment. When the master and servant came to their senses, Xiao Shenjiao had already left. Eunuch Wan came to his senses and said, Your Majesty, please. No need. Emperor Jianwen stared at the scroll in his hand for a moment. Go and forget it, let's talk about it tomorrow, there is no rush now. Yes. Seeing Emperor Jianwen stand up, Wang Gonggong quickly stepped forward and supported Emperor Jianwen. Early the next morning, the news of King An's arrest spread. Some say that King An contradicted Emperor Jianwen, others say that King An rebelled. In short, without exception, it is the kind of thing that will cause anger. Sulayun accompanied Xiang Lingling and once again received treatment from Mr. Zhang. My head hurts a little. Xiang Lingling frowned, but fortunately the pain was not unbearable. Lao Zhang took off the silver needles one by one, his expression much more relaxed than last time. I have already given the prescription to the maid. You should drink it once a day in the morning and evening. I will come back to administer the acupuncture in 5 days. Xiang Lingling looked slightly startled. Mr. Zhang, what do you mean? The acupuncture method this time has been improved and is more suitable for your eye disease. You mean, can my eyes get better? It depends on the follow-up situation. If there is no effect after 3 injections, We have to find another way. Lao Zhang gave a few instructions, took his things and left. In the next few days, he will have to think about the poison. Xiang Lingling's eyes were still covered by black cloth, but from the curvature of the corners of her mouth, it was not difficult to see her joy. You can just take care of yourself and be treated with peace of mind. Sulayun said. He nodded to Lingling, and as if he thought of something, he said, "Cousin, my grandma hasn't caused any trouble in the past few days." "Yes. That." Sulayun held Xiang Lingling's hand, patted it a few times, and signaled to Xiang Lingling. "It has been making trouble for so many days and suddenly it stopped. It is naturally impossible to say that there is no problem in this. She has been stared at for a long time, and some clues have been noticed. Just take care of yourself." Sulayun stayed with Xiang Lingling for a while, then got up and left. As soon as he left the house, he saw Mrs. Yang poking her head out of her room, met her eyes, and hurriedly pretended not to care. "Grandma, is there anything wrong with what you are eating these days?" Sulayun stepped forward and asked as if caring about the old lady. He straightened his body to the old lady and said, "Just try to do it, there's no problem." "Really? Or maybe there are servants who are not taking good care of me. How about I ask someone to replace the servants in Chaeyun Pavilion?" "Then, that's no need." Mrs. Yang's heart tightened, thinking that Sulayun had seen something, but after carefully observing Sulayun's expression, she saw nothing. "Well, it's nothing, I'll leave first." "Well, let's go back." After Sulayun left, Xiang Madam closed the door to block the outside view. Sulayun left Chaeyun Pavilion and turned around. Instead of returning to Kaahwaziazu, he asked Kualayu to say something and prepare the carriage to leave the city for a trip to Dabi Temple. The carriage drove out of the city gate and headed in the direction of Dabi Temple. The founding emperor of the Dacian dynasty believed in Buddhism very much, so since the founding of the Dacian dynasty, there have been more and more temples. But it is not often that temples can last for a long time. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of large and small temples around the capital. The ones with a really long history are Dabi Temple, Tianbao Temple, and Lanjiao Temple. However, among the three, the one with the most historical background is undoubtedly the Dabi Temple. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter returns, the real daughter is reborn. Author, Past and Present. Chapter 378. Chapter 378 The Corpse in the Dry Well. The reason is that the Dabi Temple was built by the previous dynasty and continues to this day. There are even rumors that the person who founded Dabi Temple at that time had a close relationship with the founding emperor of the Dacian dynasty. In short, all kinds of extraordinary things make Dabi Temple very famous. But since the plague broke out in Beijing 15 years ago, and many female relatives of high-ranking officials came to Dabi Temple for refuge, Dabi Temple has become lonely. The carriage stopped quietly. Sulayun got off the carriage, and Lian Xian and Kualayu followed her and walked towards Dabi Temple together. "But Mr. Pingle Township." A young monk stepped forward and said to Sulayun. Sulayun stopped and nodded to the young monk. "My little girl, Sulayun, has an appointment with the abbot today. Sorry to bother you. I have been waiting for you for a long time, please come with me." The three masters and servants followed the young monk towards the back of the main hall. Going through the corridor, there is a small hall. There is also a Buddha statue in the hall. An elderly monk was kneeling on the futon and beating the wooden fish. "Abbot, Lord Pingle Township is here." After a long time, the old monk spoke calmly. Seeing this, the young monk bowed to Sulayun again, then turned and left. Liangzin and Kualayu looked at each other, stepped back a few steps, and stood a little further away. "Mr. Pingle Xiang, please take a seat." The old monk opened his eyes, stood up, walked aside, and slowly sat down cross-legged, signaling Sulayun's arrival. Sulayun stepped forward and sat down like the old monk. Grand Master. Mr. Pinglesyang, there is no need to say more. I already know the purpose of your coming. The old monk sighed softly and opened his slightly squinted eyes. You already know. Sulayun was a little surprised, and his expression became a little solemn. She had asked someone to come here before, and she only said that she wanted to come to pray. At that time, the servant should have explained her identity, but after coming today, it was indeed a bit strange. Sulayun thought of the attitude of the young monk before, and then observed the old monk in front of him. She didn't say what she wanted to do when she came to Debi temple. What did the abbot know about her purpose? As if he saw Sulayun's suspicion, the old monk's long voice sounded. I didn't expect that 15 years have passed. As soon as Sulayun heard this, he understood what the old monk meant. This is probably the purpose he mentioned. Sulayun did come here because of what happened 15 years ago, so when he heard the old monk's words, his expression did not change. Among the people who took refuge in Debi temple, there were only 2 pregnant women. One was your mother and the other was a woman from the Li family. Hearing the old monk mention the 4 words wife of the Li family, Sulayun's expression became a little unbearable. Even the wife of the Li family could tell her that the old monk in front of her might know more than she thought. Sulayun took a deep breath and listened quietly to the old monk's words. The Li family's wife is just a rough lady. Naturally, there will be no one around her to take care of her, and she doesn't have a husband by her side. Her Majesty is kind-hearted and lets her maids take care of her. Sulayun knew that the person who was taking care of the Li family's wife was none other than Nanny Li, who was currently beside her mother. For this reason, Grandma Li has always felt guilty about this matter, and she also hates what the wife of the Li family has done. It was a rainy day, and the Li family's wife was the first to have an attack. Later, her father, I don't know whether he was frightened or for some reason, also had the attack. I remember that when Po, who delivered the babies for the Li family's wife and your father, was accompanied by a woman. Come. A woman? Sulayun immediately heard the deep meaning of the old monk's words, who is that woman? Being mentioned specifically by the old monk, Sulayun felt that he might be getting closer to the truth. The old monk did not answer directly, but continued, Po when delivered 2 babies one after another. The Li family's wife and your father-in-law both gave birth to a daughter, and one of them is you, Miss Su. And the other one, is not Su Wainer. Sulayun's breath was stagnant, and his eyes were fixed on the old monk. You knew it back then. Lao Na didn't know it at the time. The old monk shook his head slowly and recited Amitabha with piety and a hint of annoyance. Later, I accidentally found a body in the dry well in the backyard. Corpse, what corpse? Sulayun's heartbeat began to speed up, and he didn't even dare to blink. The old monk opened and closed his mouth and said, the body of a newborn baby girl. His voice seemed to come from a far-away place, and Sulayun almost didn't hear it clearly. But after she heard it clearly, she didn't know how to react. Sulayun swallowed and spoke with some difficulty, am I, my mother's child? Miss Su, there is no need to doubt your identity. The birthmark on your body is the best proof. The old monk shook his head lightly, dispelling Sulayun's suspicion. Sulayun's heart dropped, but soon, he pursed his lips again, but didn't know how to speak. It was already 2 months since I saw the corpse. The plague in the capital has been lifted, your daughter-in-law has returned to the Su mansion long ago, and the whereabouts of the Li family woman have long since disappeared. Abbot, who is that body? Sulayun still asked this question. The old monk raised his eyes full of compassion, and looked at Sulayun. Who do you think Ms. Su is? If Su Wainer is not the child of the Li family, then whose child is it, and how was she transferred to my mother? Sulayun did not answer the old monk's question. Both she and the old monk knew the answer. The person is already dead, so it is useless to worry about these things. The most important thing now is to know Suwainer's identity. Who is she? The day after you were born, the woman who came with Wenpo disappeared. The old monk once again mentioned the woman, who was the most important part of the whole thing. Suleun breathed out slowly and listened carefully. That woman didn't speak when she first arrived. I didn't think much about it at that time. It wasn't until I saw the corpse that I realized that that person was from southern Xinjiang. How do you know for sure? Suleun was a little confused. If the woman looked like someone from southern Xinjiang, the abbot should have known it at the time. How could he not know until he saw the corpse? Could it be that? Suleun had a guess. Did you find anything on that corpse? The old monk nodded. Just as Miss Su said, I discovered the clues on that corpse. What is it? The old monk's eyes fell into the air, not knowing what he was looking at. Or maybe he was thinking about the situation when he saw the corpse. What does Miss Su think the body of a baby will look like if it stays in a dry well for 2 months? End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter returns, the real daughter is reborn. Author, past and present. Chapter 379. Chapter 379 I will definitely come to save you. Suleun frowned slightly. As a doctor, she should know the answer. 2 months, although it is a dry well, the mouth of the well is small and the hole is deep. It is probably in a humid environment. The body of a baby turned into a pile of bones. The old monk nodded very slowly, agreeing with Suleun's statement. But when I saw the corpse, the skin and flesh on the corpse were intact. All the skin and flesh are there? And his face is rosy, not like a dead person. Suleun couldn't help but take a breath of air. She naturally understood what the old monk said. There are very few ways to prevent a corpse from decaying and making it look as if it were still alive. The people of southern Xinjiang have a kind of goo insect that can do it. As for other methods, Suleun didn't think about it. If he wanted to maintain the appearance of the corpse in the dry well, he didn't think about it except for southern border goo insects. After Lao Na took the body out of the dry well, he had it inspected, and sure enough, goo insects were found, but as soon as they were taken out, the goo insects died. Suleun nodded. She knew that once the goo worm leaves the human body, it will die. I'm ashamed to say that the corpse was buried on the back mountain by me. The old monk bowed to Suleun. If I had discovered it earlier, or informed him of the matter when he discovered it, Donor Su would not have been innocent. After so many years of suffering. It was because the old monk only thought that the woman from southern Xinjiang was responsible for the incident, but he did not expect that the woman from the Li family was also an accomplice. At that time, the situation was probably like this. The woman from southern Xinjiang took Suwainer with her, but for some unknown reason, she deliberately exchanged the child with the woman from the Li family. Unexpectedly, the Li family woman was so bold that she exchanged her child with Suleun, which completely changed the lives of the 3 children. Mrs. Li's real daughter died 15 years ago, and Suleun and Suwainer were also found to have abnormal identities 15 years later. Suleun sighed. Perhaps the most pitiable among them was the daughter of the Li family, who died not long after she was born. If it weren't for the southern Xinjiang woman's mistake, maybe that child could live a good life in the Su family like Suwainer. If it hadn't been for his death, he would have died long ago. Suleun thought of Granny Lan. Abbot, do you remember anything about that woman from southern Xinjiang? For example, are there any characteristics that impressed you deeply? The old monk shook his head. When she came, she wrapped herself tightly. It was raining and it was indeed cold, so I didn't think much about it. Seeing that the old monk really couldn't tell anything about the southern Xinjiang woman, Suleun didn't ask any more questions. She had already learned a lot of things from the old monk, which was enough. At the very least, She has confirmed Suwaner's identity. If Granny Lan is really the woman from southern Xinjiang who changed her children, then she has been staying by Suwaner's side, and Suwaner's identity must have a lot of background. Sulayun stood up, said goodbye to the old monk, and left with Lian Xian and Quilau. In the carriage, Lotus Heart and Green Willow, you look at me and I look at you. They were not too far away and could vaguely hear the conversation between Sulayun and the old monk. The truth revealed in this makes people feel horrified. If that woman from southern Xinjiang were bolder, would the person who died 15 years ago become their lady? No one spoke. The whole journey back to Sun Mansion was silent. Sulayun got off the carriage and went to the yard where Suwaner and the Li family were imprisoned. These three people have been locked up in one place for 7 days. Being unable to make a sound or move, 7 days is enough time for the Li family and his wife to become crazy. But Suwaner's perseverance is particularly strong. Sulayun pushed the door open and walked in. The Li family and his wife had dull eyes. When they heard the sound, there was no movement. Take the people out. Sulayun's eyes swept over the Li family woman. Then he looked at Suwaner on the bed. She stepped forward and asked Lian Xian to feed Suwaner a pill. Suwaner couldn't resist, her eyes fluttered for a while, but soon, the itching in her throat made her understand something. After waiting for a moment, Suwaner's hoarse voice sounded. You, what do you want to do? Her voice was very low, the result of not speaking for a long time. Sulayun opened her lips and asked, Suwaner, where is Granny Lan? Suwaner opened her mouth, as if she was surprised why Sulayun would ask such a question. Moreover, sooner or later, why is this time? Her eyes rolled, Sulayun saw it and did not urge her to answer. After waiting for a moment, Suwaner said, what's the point of telling you where Granny Lan is? Benefit. Sulayun raised his eyebrows and smiled, you're already like this, what's the point of talking to me? Suwaner, there's something I think you'd be more curious about than me. What? Suwaner heard Sulayun's laughter and asked subconsciously. But soon, she felt that Sulayun was coaxing her. I don't think you knew that Granny Lan was from southern Xinjiang before, Sulayun said while observing the change in Suwaner's expression. When hearing her words, Suwaner showed a hint of panic. Just as Sulayun said, when Granny Lan took out the goo worm, she realized that the person who had been with her for many years turned out to be from southern Xinjiang. So you don't know that not only are you not a child of the Su family, you are also not a child of the Li family. What did you say? Suwaner could not move, but her voice was trembling. Her mind was spinning rapidly, thinking about Sulayun's words. But several times, she couldn't think clearly. She is no longer a child of the Su family, but she can't even be a child of the Li family. Even if she doesn't want to be a child of the Li family, she should still have parents. Sulayun, don't think that I will tell you the whereabouts of Granny Lan just because you say this. You don't even know where Granny Lan is. Sulayun's words broke Suwaner's thoughts, and then she continued, because you don't know that Granny Lan is from southern Xinjiang, you also don't know that it was Granny Lan who transferred you to the Su family. Although this is just a conjecture of Sulayun, at this time, it might not be a bad idea to take advantage of it. Sulayun, what do you know? Suwaner tried her best to see Sulayun's face, but she could only see Sulayun's jaw. That's all I know. The rest may have to be explained to you by Granny Lan. Have you found her? No, Sulayun's tone was a little lighter, but I believe she will definitely come to save you. Why should she come to save me? Suwaner didn't know why, she snorted lightly, her voice full of mockery. But no one could answer her question. Sulayun has left, and Suwaner has not lost her voice again. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter returns, the real daughter is reborn. Author, past and present. Chapter 380. Chapter 380 I was wronged. It's the dead of night again. Somewhere on the outskirts of Beijing, Chen Cheng, dressed in black and wearing a black scarf, directed his men to carefully transport the iron ore in the mine car. "Sir, it's not good." With his men panicking, dozens of forbidden troops rushed in. Chen Cheng's face, which was hidden under the black scarf, changed drastically, his eyes flashed, and he said loudly, "Don't panic, everyone." At the sound of his voice, everyone who was about to make any movement stopped. Chen Cheng pulled off his black scarf, stepped forward, and said to the leader of the imperial army, "Master Feng, why are you here?" "Master Chen," Feng Hu squinted his eyes. The sky was dark. He looked for a long time before he recognized Chen Cheng's appearance. "I would like to know why Master Chen is here. Since Mr. Feng is here too, he knows what's going on here." Chen Cheng looked at the mine carts and said, "These are the iron ore hidden by Kingen." Feng Hu's expression remained unchanged, but there was a flash of suspicion in his eyes. "Mr. Chen, please come with us. This is natural. If we find these iron mines, I should return to your majesty." Chen Cheng looked calm and unfazed. This made Feng Hu a little more surprised, but also a little more vigilant. But until he entered the palace, Chen Cheng did not do anything extra. It was as if he was really a loyal and patriotic minister, but he just happened to discover the iron ore and didn't have time to report it to the emperor. In the imperial study room, the lights were still brightly lit. Emperor Jianwen has been dealing with the affairs of Kingen and the iron mines these days, and now there are a few bruises on his face. "Your Majesty, Lord Feng is back. Let him in." Emperor Jianwen did not raise his eyes still fell on the memorial in front of him. The memorials sent in these days are doubled than in the past, most of which are complaining about the tyrannical of the king, such as the occupation of farmland, forcibly recruiting, and robbing the women. The memorial was thrown on the table by Emperor Jianwen. Eunuch Wan glanced at the words on the memorial and silently looked away. Forced women? In this capital, when it comes to lecherous people, Kingen may not even be ranked among them. Moreover, this prince also has a little hobby. He dislikes girls from good families the most, but instead likes girls who come from brothels. But at this time, everyone is pushing against the wall. Regardless of whether there is something or not, they all report it to the police, so as to show that they are not so unique at this time. Eunuch Wan lowered his head and said nothing. Soon, Feng Hu took Chen Cheng into the palace. "I see you, your majesty." The two of them saluted, and at Emperor Jianwen's signal, they stood up slowly. Emperor Jianwen glanced at Chen Cheng, then his eyes fell on Feng Hu. "What did Master Feng discover?" "Back to your majesty, I followed your instructions and found the place where the iron ore is stored." "But..." Feng Hu glanced at Chen Cheng from the corner of his eye and continued, "When I arrived, I found that Lord Chen had taken a step ahead of me and had already taken him with me. People are moving the iron ore." "Oh." Emperor Jianwen's eyes then fell on Chen Cheng. The two of them came in together. Although Emperor Jianwen was a little surprised, he didn't think much about it. Only now did he react after hearing Feng Hu's words. "Master Chen, what are you doing there so late?" "Back to your majesty, Wei Chen received a report from his subordinates and found the place where the iron ore was hidden. Because he was afraid of disturbing his majesty, he thought of reporting it tomorrow. But Wei Chen was worried about being discovered by others during this period, so he took people there and wanted to first transport the iron ore out and send it to the treasury. It is an honor for me to have such a dedicated minister as Mr. Chen in the great Sheng dynasty. Your majesty shows love, but I dare not." When Chen Cheng heard this, he opened his clothes and knelt down. His expression was calm and every move was impeccable. In the palace, Emperor Jianwen narrowed his eyes slightly. He suddenly waved his hand and said, "Mr. Chen, you have worked hard. Go back and rest early." "Yes, I am resigning." Chen Chen lowered his head, slowly backed away, and left the imperial study room. Your Majesty, I have to trouble Mr. Feng to make a hard trip to transport all the iron ore to the treasury. I obey the decree. Feng, who did not ask Emperor Jianwen why he let Chen Chen go so easily. Firstly, the emperor's actions were not something that a minister could question. Secondly, Feng, who felt that the emperor must have his reasons for doing so. In one night, most of the iron ore was transported to the treasury. In the early dynasty, Emperor Jianwen did not mention the iron ore matter, and turned a deaf ear to the matter of King'an. When the court came down, Xiao Jing caught a glimpse of Xiao Shenjiao's back, his eyes flashed, and he followed him. Third brother, what do you think about the sixth brother's matter? Xiao Jin's tone was very gentle, like an older brother who cares about his younger brother. Xiao Shenjiao paused and turned around to look at Xiao Jin. There was only indifference in his eyes. The smile on Xiao Jin's face almost failed her, so she could only straighten the corners of her mouth and meet Xiao Shenjiao's eyes. It's just about reaping the consequences. After saying this, Xiao Shenjiao turned around and left calmly. Xiao Jin was left standing there alone, dazed for a long time. In his mind, Xiao Shenjiao's words were repeated over and over again. Xiao Jin frowned, always feeling that there was something in Xiao Shenjiao's words. In the prison, King'an shouted at the top of his lungs, I want to see my father. Father, my son has been wronged. It's just that his words could not reach the ears of Emperor Jianwen. Only the jailer on the side can hear it. Soon, footsteps were heard not far away. King'an was still shouting, so he immediately opened the cell door and looked in the direction of the footsteps. A familiar figure appeared in front of King'an. Fourth brother. Wang An shouted. Xiao Jin walked forward and saw a somewhat embarrassed King'an, with more worry on his face. Sixth brother, how are you? Fourth brother, help me tell my father that I was wrongly accused. As if seeing a life-saving straw, King'an suddenly grabbed the hem of Xiao Jin's clothes and prayed. He was a dignified prince who had always lived in fine clothes and fine food. How could he endure the treatment in the prison? After staying here for the past few days, he felt like he was going crazy. This is even more terrifying than the last time he was assassinated. Xiao Jin patted Wang An's slightly cleaner cuffs and took a step away without leaving any trace, so as to get rid of Wang An's hand grabbing the hem of his clothes. Don't worry, sixth brother, I will tell my father, but, this matter is really big. Sixth brother, have you really never done this? Of course I don't have any. Hearing Xiao Jin's words, King'an quickly defended himself without paying attention to Xiao Jin's actions. I did deliberately hide the mine, but I didn't want to take it for myself. I just wanted to tell my father after mining it. This would also make my father worry less, and also let my father see that I am not all I can do is eat and drink. Wang An said, his voice a little trembling. It seemed like I wanted to cry. Xiao Jin turned away his face and said, I will tell my father. Don't worry, sixth brother. My father is just angry for a moment. He will be fine after the anger subsides in a few days. End of this chapter.